he was born in 1955, and he died in 2011. Again, we say at a very young age. Then we his story, his biography is very instructive. It has lessons to learn, lessons of innovation, uh, creativity, caution, character, leadership, and values. Now, in his early life, he was an adopted child. So he had a, since he was an adopted child, there was a certain level of independence that he always had in his personality. But he also wanted control. He was very cruel also at times. So you see, his products are not compatible with others. They're unique in their own way. He was adopted by his parents, Paul and Clara. He could not accept the fact that his biological parents had given him away. So he was he was reflectively cruel and harmful to people. And he was not what we say a man with the who had the uh, characteristic of being patient. So patience was not one of his virtues. And he had a unique combination of independence and control. He co-founded Apple with Stephen Wozniak in 1976, and it made a beginning in his father's garage at Los Altos. His friend Stephen Wozniak was a person, an electronics man. So it was his technical knowledge which was combined with the business vision of Steve Jobs, which worked wonders for the world. So we say it was leaps of imagination combined with remarkable feats of engineering. So when his biological parents gave him away, his adopted parents were instructed that he should study. So he should study. So his parents put in pie and pie together to make him study. His parents wanted him to study, but he was very, he had no interest in studies, and he refused to go to any good college. He refused to go to even to Stanford, saying that people they who go to Stanford are very sure of what they want to do. They're not creative, they're not artistic. So he refused to go to Stanford, which would have given him a scholarship, but chose to go to Reeds, which was one of the most expensive college in the nation. But there too, so he went to that college which was distant from his place, which was very expensive. But there too, he went there out of choice, but there too he got bored with studies. And he complained, tells Wozniak, I could not I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me, and I started beginning to drop in on the ones that interested me, like dance and calligraphy. And he just didn't like the idea. He said, look, they're making me do these courses in which I have no interest. So he had interest in dance and calligraphy, and he started attending these classes. In calligraphy, he was fascinated by the way the strokes were made on each alphabet. So, and the spaces, equal spaces that is kept. So he found this very creative. He found this, you call this serif, which is a stroke that you give to, so the handle of a F, or the end of A, tail of A, or the edges of E. So this is how he says these fascinated him. So this is sans serif without a stroke, and this is serif with a stroke. So all these kinds creative things fascinated with him. So he started going to attend calligraphy classes and dance classes. Though at that point of time, he says when he reflects back, Job says at that point of time it had no meaning for me. But then whatever knowledge you learn, he says whatever knowledge will have a reflection, will have value for you later in life. So he says that these had no practical application in life then, but later he used this knowledge of serif, sans serif, and the spaces in the design of Macintosh. The proportionately spaced fonts is is sort of something which he reflected, and he went back to his classes in college in calligraphy. So he says that no knowledge is ever a waste. It can be used in the future. So you can never connect the dots forward. You always connect the dots backwards. So whatever knowledge you've learned, whatever learning you had, it is going to be useful for you later on in life. Not necessarily now, but it is going to be of great use to you later on in life. So he says that you can never connect the dots forward, you always connect the dots backwards. Further on, he realized that still he was wasting time in college, and he said, my parents are putting in money, hard earned money. I'm wasting my parents' hard earned money. It's better I don't, and I'm wasting my time. So he decided to drop out of college. He took up a job at Atari as a technician for $5 an hour. He spent much of his time in the Hare Krishna movement, based in Dallas, and then he decided to come to India, and he needed this money of. He collected this money of $5 an hour. He said, I needed money to go to India. And he came to India in 1974, stayed in the foothills of Nainital. He stayed in the foothills of Nainital, visited Haridwar, stayed at Haridwar. Basic purpose was in search of enlightenment. He was basically troubled by the fact that, who am I? He didn't know his origin. So he was troubled by the fact that he was given away by his parents. So he had a desire to come to India in search of what we call enlightenment in 1974. He stayed at Haridwar in the foothills of Nainital. I had been turned on the idea of enlightenment. He had joined the Hare Krishna movement, and he was trying to figure out who I was and how I fitted into things. However, he returned a year later in 1975, and another year later in 1976, Apple was born. He co founded Apple with his friend Wozniak. Both had 50-50% share. Initially, a person was also there, Wayne, Wayne, who had a 10% share, but possibly he could not see the future of Apple, so he wound up and sold those shares to both Jobs and Wozniak, and no more was he a shareholder. So basically, we associate Apple with these two individuals, that is Steve Jobs and Wozniak. So it's Wozniak's technical knowledge and the business vision or the creativity of Jobs, which we find in the products of Apple. So by connecting consumer, then he did not believe in market research. I think I've mentioned this earlier also. He said, because consumers really do not know what you want unless you have shown them. To quote him, customers do not know what they want until we have shown him. Therefore, our task is to read things which is not on the page, not yet on the page. So he says it's an open space. You have to decipher things, you have to write it for others. So consumers do not know what they want unless and until you have shown them. So he wanted Apple to grow. So he picked on a CEO of PepsiCo, John Scully, and to give the company a direction, because he was more involved in product development, designing new products. So, how to get Scully? When he wanted Scully to join his own company, he used the words. When he met him, he told him, do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of the life, or do you want a chance to change the world? For some time, Scully was thinking, and then he joined Apple. So, this is how Leod, he sort of looked down on PepsiCo and the products they were making, and made Scully leave PepsiCo and join his own company. So he said, do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to get a chance to change the world? For some things, for some years, Scully and Jobs, the relationship was okay, but later on, differences came about between them, and therefore came on between them. Can you hear me now, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, students,
Yes,
can you
ma'am.
hear? Oh, now this is where I asked you. There was a diverse. There was a difference of vision between the two. So it was Scully was brought by Jobs, and later on, Jobs was thrown out of the company. In the Indian context, also similar happening has taken place lately, a couple of years back, wherein uh, a person was got by to take a strategic position, then he was himself thrown out. Can anybody relate to it? Yes.
Cyrus Mistry
Ratan
Tata.
Tata, yes, he brought.
Cyrus Mistry.
Yes, Ratan Tata, exactly. Can I know your name?
Ma'am Umar Mustafa.
Yes, student Omar. Yes, Omar, you're right. Ratan
Yes,
Tata
ma'am.
brought in Cyrus Mistry to give the company a direction. He was his pet, but later on, because of difference in vision, he was thrown out of his own. He was thrown out. Cyrus Mistry was thrown out, and he happened to be his pet. So this is how when there's a diversion of vision, there's a different vision. This is what happens. So in this case, in the case of Ratan Tata, basically Tatas have social motive as a major goal. But Cyrus Mistry, for him, profitability was more important. So that is where we see their diversion in their thinking pattern. In this case, uh, for Scully, Apple was a business. It was about making money. But in this case, it was making money uh, for Jobs. Apple was a passion. It was his passion. So even if it meant investing a huge sum of money to get some work done, Jobs would not step back. So there was this diversion of vision which came about. There was clash of interest which came about. For Apple, the company, Apple was making money. Apple was a business for him. It was about making money. It was about growth. For Jobs, Apple was a passion. So it meant if he designed a product, okay, let's launch it. He was willing to take risks. But uh, Scully was not willing to take risks. So this is where was the clash of interest. So he said if a product would he would launch a product even if it does not sell, because that was his passion. He was passionate about the company, passionate about creativity. So there was a clash of interest. For Apple, the company, Apple was making money. It was a business. For Jobs, Apple was a passion. And uh, very soon, Jobs was thrown out of the own company which he himself built. And the board sided with Scully, just like Cyrus Mistri's case. The board sided with Ratan Tata, and Cyrus Mistry was thrown out. So he dropped the baton when it was being passed on to him. And for months, he saw himself as a public failure, and Jobs did not know what to do. Yet, when you look back, he says, "But that's the best thing that could have happened to me. Trust in something, gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever you call it. Have the confidence to follow your heart, and you'll be able to connect the dots backward." Again, he says, you can never connect the dot forward, you always connect it backward. So he says, don't lose faith. You have got to find what you love, and you must love what you do. Else you will not be a success. I still loved what I did, and I stuck to it. Being out from Apple gave me a chance to set up my own venture. So he says, I would have never got a chance to set up my own venture. He says, when you're successful, you're heavy with success. But when you are, uh, when you become a beginner, so he was thrown out, so he had to begin again. So it was replaced by a feeling of lightness, and as I became a beginner. So outs from Apple gave him the opportunity to start his own company next, use his own intuition to make a product. He created a cube shaped computer, which was a technical marvel, but it was priced very high and it did not do well in the market. So he started selling softwares. He focused on selling softwares. In the meantime, Apple was not doing well. The Macintosh, which Jobs had created, had no longer the technical advantage over cheaper PCs. So you see, Macintosh was launched, it did well, but then imitators follow. So there were other PCs, cheaper PCs launched which were running on Microsoft Windows, and executives of Apple did not know what to do to regain the competitive advantage. So they lost the competitive advantage. Apple was not doing well. At that time, um Scully was had left, and it was Emilio who took over as the CEO. And Emilio acquired Next. So they acquired the company which Jobs had built, and that is how Jobs was reinstated to Apple. So Apple began to lose control over the computer industry. The then CEO, acquired Next, and that is how Jobs was reinstated. And Jobs returned to Apple in 1996. And after resignation of Emilio, he became the interim CIO. We call him interim because he was officiating for the time period. So he says his commitment was tentative. He took no salary, he signed no contract, but he was not tentative in actions. He was whole and soul in charge. And his interim I was for interim status became an infinite status. He became the CEO forever. But he took only $1 in salary. He says 50 cents for showing up and 50 cents for my performance. He said, I don't want people to think that I've come back to Apple in order to make money. So he took only $1 salary. Now, Apple, the brand. So he was so creative not only when he designed the new products, he was creative in his ad campaign also. In his advertising campaign, he showed pictures of people whom you could easily associate, recognize, and also pictures of people who were not so easily recognizable, but they were his personal heroes who defied, who were his personal heroes. So Apple was one of the great brands of the world for brand image campaign according to Jobs. He said Apple was not designated to celebrate what computers could do, but what creative people could do with computers. See how differently he thinks. He says computers are not about processor speed or memory. Computer is basically about creativity. So he says when we design computers, it is not about processor speed or memory. Apple designs computer for creativity. So he used the concept think different. Apple is about people who think outside the box, who want to use computers to help change the world. He used the word think different in his keynote address. He created one of the most memorable print campaign. Each ad featured a black and white portrait of an iconic historical figure with just the Apple logo and the words think different in the corner, which making it particularly engaging with the faces of prominent personalities like Einstein, Mahatma Gandhi, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Picasso, Edison, Chaplin, people you could easily recognize. But there were other people who caused people to pause, puzzle, and ask a friend to put a name on his face. Martha Graham, Ansel Adams, Maria Callas, Richard Feynman, etc. So he had his own method of even the advertising campaign. These were Jobs' personal heroes. They tended to be creative, who had taken risks and defied failure, and they bet they carry on doing things differently. So that was his tagline: uh, "Think different." After 12 years, they were the most productive years for Apple, which created new products, launched new products. The goal was to create a company which was imbued with innovative creativity. You see, he's not talking about technology, he's all the time talking about creativity, that it would outlive them. In 2005, the company, which had a beginning in a garage, was a 2 billion company with 4,000 employees. Steve Jobs was passionate about what he was doing. We can say, he was a creative entrepreneur whose passion for perfection, ferocious drive, revolutionized six industries: the personal computer industry, animated music industry, animated movies industry, music industry, phones, tablet computing, digital publishing, whatnot. He produced not only transforming products, but also had a lasting company endowed with his DNA and daredevil engineers who could carry his vision, his creativity forward. The fiscal year that ended, Jobs became ICO 1997, had lost 1.04 billion. So that was the year when Jobs came back to Apple. But later on, within 2 years, they made profits of $309 billion. Jobs then ended his annual presentation. Earlier, he would always end the presentation with think different. He replaced the word think different with the words think profit. Jobs was back, and so was Apple back. But he started staying ill. He developed kidney stones. His kidney problem led to detection of cancer. A scan revealed a shadow in his pancreas. He was asked to schedule a pancreatic study, but he didn't agree. He didn't want his body to be opened. He was willfully ignoring inputs that he did not want to process. This was part of his nature. He knew he was ill, but he did not want to accept. This was part of his nature, that a certain truths he would refuse to accept. This stubbornness, obstinacy was a dark side of his personality, and after a relentless struggle with illness for 10 years, he died of pancreatic cancer on 2005, 2011. Job is known for the iPhone, he's known for the iPod, the iPad, products which distinguished from other competitors. Each was unique in its own way. You can see whether you talk the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. Some leaders push innovation by being good at the big picture, others do by mastering details. But Jobs did both relentlessly, and he launched a series of products over 3 decades that transformed, as we said, 6 industries: the Apple II, the Macintosh, which became the home computer revolution and popularized graphical user interface. It changed the whole computer industry. The Apple stores, he reinvented the role of store in defining a brand. Then the iPod, which gave us the joy of having 1,000 songs in your own pocket. Sony had all their sets to launch something like this, but they did not take benefit of this opportunity. The iTunes stores, that's another contribution. The iPad, the iPhone, and the Apple company in itself, which Jobs considers his greatest contribution. Now, August 2011, before he stepped down as CEO, the Apple company we started in his parents' garage became the world's most valuable company. So we associate Jobs as an icon of inventiveness, imagination, sustained innovation. We remember Jobs connected creativity with technology. We remember him not only for his products, for the company, for the innovation, but also for the inspiration that he gives us. He says being a corporate slave is an easy option. Note very carefully: being a corporate slave was an easy option, but not one that felt right, because there was something bigger and better to do with their talents. So they did the things others thought was foolish, and they stayed hungry for that something more. Stay hungry, stay foolish is what he advised the graduating students of Stanford University in his commencement speech in 2005. So he says, stay hungry, stay foolish. And this is what has been given by uh, the book Connect the Dots. I'm sure many of you who have been aspirants of MBA must have read this, by Rashmi Bansal, where she covered 25 IMA graduates. She covered 25 IMA graduates, IIM Ahmedabad graduates, who gave up a successful career to launch something on their own. We can have a short clipping of Steve Jobs. I think there are 2-3 minutes we can
This program is brought
spend.
to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few weeks later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. had to do with my life. And here I was spending all the money my parents saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out. And begin dropping in on the ones that were far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't hold miles across town every Sunday night. To get one good meal a week at the
Ma'am, I feel like there's some technical glitch because the video is getting
Let me
paused
give you one
again and
example.
again.
college at that time. That's I had to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later.
Could you hear him? Yes, students.
Ma'am, there were some certain technical glitches, but we just heard the last part where he said that when he started connecting the dots backwards.
Do we hear it again? And then maybe the next video we could. Do you have time? Let me see. I will
Your voice is not clear, ma'am.
not like you to miss a word of it.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no
Excuse me,
personal
ma'am?
computer would have them.
Yes.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but we have another class for quantitative methods.
If I had never
Jamal
dropped
Bhai's
out,
class.
I
I
would
just
have never
complete this
dropped
and
in
carry on
on
tomorrow.
Okay, ma'am. Okay,
Most
ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later.
Okay. Could you have class with whom?
Ma'am, Asif
Asif
sir.
Akhtar sir.
Asif Akhtar
Ma'am,
sir.
Asif
Okay,
sir.
I'll just text to Asif. Let this complete because he was just calling me now. I'll just text to Asif.
Who are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking, not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day.
Asif, I'll take
Later that
10
evening,
minutes of your
I had a
class.
biopsy
फिर मैं बात
where they
करती
stuck an
हूँ आपसे.
endoscope down my throat,
ठीक है, because they
through
told
my
me तुम्हारे
stomach,
class
into my
है, so I'll
intestines,
just tell him and take
put a
10 minutes of
needle
your
into
class.
my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away.
When the video gets stuck, we cannot hear it.
Limited. Already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park. And he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing came along. It was on the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their "Stay foolish." And I have always wished that. Thank you all very much.
So I think, students, we can stop now.
Yes.
Ma'am, we can hear
Sure,
it
ma'am.
again on YouTube,
Yes, students.
probably.
Yes, I'll forward you the link so you can hear the complete on YouTube, right?
Okay, ma'am.
Do
Okay,
so.
ma'am.
So we,
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
okay, dear. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Students, we wind up now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.